Welcome to Folk Fear, where every story is a breath from the past and every whisper might still be listening. Here we speak of forgotten places, shrines without worshippers, gods without names, and prayers that echo long after the mouths that spoke them have turned to dust. Tonight, we open the door to something left behind, to a shrine buried beneath roots, beneath silence, beneath shame. A place where no one prays anymore, but something still listens, something that remembers. So light a candle, sit close, and do not speak its name unless you're willing to be heard. This is The Whispering Shrine, a haunting folk horror tale.
The road into the village was barely more than a breath between the trees. Mina Wren sat in the back of a sputtering bus, clutching her notebook, its corners worn soft from years of use. Outside the cracked window, the forest whispered, a hush of branches heavy with early autumn. The leaves did not fall like in other places. Here, they seemed to drift upward before sinking, as though uncertain of the earth. It was said, in some forgotten tale she had once read, that when ash leaves fall in windless air, it means something beneath the soil is stirring. The village appeared without ceremony, a handful of crooked roofs, smoke curling from chimneys that had not been rebuilt in decades. A wooden sign dangled from rusted wire at the fork of the road, its name long faded, the paint blistered like peeling skin. Beneath it, someone had scratched a symbol into the wood. It looked like an open mouth. Mina stepped off the bus. No one else got off. The driver didn't speak, only nodded once, his eyes not meeting hers, and drove on without a backward glance. Silence rushed in like water. She had come here chasing silence, or more truthfully, what lived inside it. As a folklorist, Mina had wandered through countless villages, piecing together the brittle bones of rituals long dead. But this one had called to her from a fragment of an old field journal written in the 1920s, a single line that had burrowed into her thoughts like a splinter. The shrine that still whispers, though no one dares to listen. No directions, no name, only the mention of ash leaves and a forgotten prayer. The village greeted her like a wound that had sealed over wrong. Old wood sagged in the architecture, walls bent from years of quiet weather. Chickens pecked at dust in the road, but no voices followed. Windows were shuttered, though the sun still hovered above the ridge. She walked slowly, her boots soft against the dirt path. Every few steps, she passed another symbol etched into wood or stone. Circles with slashes through them, arrows pointing upward, triangles with open bases. Protective markings, she noted. Old folk-based wardings, not modern, not for tourists. These were made by hands that still feared what they once worshipped. Outside the inn, if it could be called that, an old man sat on a wooden stool, carving something into a strip of bark, with a blade that looked older than the village itself. "Excuse me," she said gently, approaching with care. "I was hoping to find a room, just for a few nights." The man looked up slowly, his eyes a pale gray that reminded her of smoke. He did not smile. "You're not from here?" "No, I study shrines, forgotten ones. I came across a mention of yours." His hands paused mid-cut. His eyes flicked to her notebook, then to the forest behind her. "You shouldn't follow the ash leaves. They fall where they please, but they lead to where no one should go." Her breath caught. "You mean the shrine?" He didn't answer, just resumed carving. The bark in his hands had a symbol carved halfway through, a narrow eye with ink already smeared into its groove. "Why not?" she pressed. "No one's spoken of it in over a century. Don't you want the history preserved?" He glanced at her again. This time there was something heavy behind his silence. Some things aren't forgotten, they're buried. And then he rose, handed me a rusted key with a wooden tag, and disappeared inside. The inn was musty but intact. Her room overlooked the forest, the branches close enough to touch. As the sun slipped behind the mountains, the light turned golden, then gray. That night, sleep came like a stranger who never quite stepped inside. She woke before dawn, and they were there. Ash leaves, dozens of them, trailing from her window, down the road, across the broken fence and into the forest. No wind, no footsteps, just the leaves, perfectly still. Mina stepped outside, drawn as if by breath. She followed, past the last house, past the trees that curved like listening ears, past a stream where frogs no longer sang. And there it was, the shrine. A hollowed, slumping structure half consumed by roots. Its torii gate leaned at an unnatural angle, and moss hung from its beams like damp skin. The altar was blackened by soot, and beside it old offerings had melted into the ground, bowls of rice fused with bone, coins swallowed by vines. But it was not empty. She stepped closer, and the air changed. Colder, not like wind, like breath held too long. She reached into her coat and pulled out her notebook, writing down everything: the symbols, the construction, the orientation of the altar. And then she heard it. Faint, low, like someone praying, but backwards. She scanned the forest. Nothing moved, not a bird, not a leaf. But the ash leaves were there again, a perfect circle around the shrine. She closed the notebook slowly. Her hand trembled, though she told herself it was only the cold. One phrase pulsed through her mind, unbidden and slow, like something not hers. A shrine without prayers is a mouth that hungers. She stepped back, and behind her, the whispering stopped.
The next morning, the world felt too quiet to be real. No roosters crowed, no dogs barked. Even the air seemed reluctant to move. Mina sat by her window, staring at the forest that had swallowed last night's moonlight. The path of ash leaves had vanished. The ground looked untouched, as if nothing and no one had walked there at all. Only her muddy boots told another story. She turned the pages of her notebook, her handwriting uneven in the dim light. She had written a line she didn't remember forming. "It's waiting beneath the soot." The old man at the inn had not appeared since dusk. Breakfast sat cold in the corner of the hall. She found a kettle of water, poured herself tea, and listened. Nothing. No voices from other rooms. No signs of life. When she stepped outside, the mist had thickened into something with shape. It moved between the houses like a living thing, brushing against walls, curling through door frames. Somewhere beyond it, the trees began their slow, ancient whisper. Mina followed the same dirt path toward the forest edge, her steps soundless against the damp ground.
Each tree leaned slightly inward, like the entire forest was bowing toward something unseen. The shrine waited where she'd left it, but it was different now. Someone, or something, had cleaned it. The soot that coated the altar was thinner, the air inside smelling faintly of ash and damp stone. She brushed a hand along the wood. It came away gray. Beneath the layer of age, she saw carvings, lines spiraling inward toward a single symbol she could not place. Not Buddhist, not Shinto, older. A pattern meant to draw the eye, to pull the soul toward the center. Beside the altar lay an offering bowl, cracked down the middle. Inside, only dust. She set her bag down, pulling out her camera, her notebook, her brush. As she dusted the altar's surface, more markings appeared. Words written not in ink, but in something darker, absorbed into the wood. A prayer, but not one meant for humans to say. She traced a few syllables with her finger. They were written in the ogami style, invocation language, older than most written Japanese, used only in rural worship. The meaning came through fragmented, broken by time. To the God who listens in silence, we give voice to keep it from speaking. She felt the chill before she understood the words. A God kept silent, not by reverence, but by fear. She looked around the shrine again. There were no offerings, no incense, no signs of continued worship. This was no place of devotion, it was containment. She stepped back, notebook in hand. Her pen shook as she wrote, "The God of this forest is not forgotten, it has been forbidden." The villagers sealed its name beneath ash and silence. A God denied offerings becomes hungry. A hungry God begins to whisper. She lifted her head. The air shifted. A faint sound came from behind the altar, dry, deliberate, like paper brushing wood. She knelt. Between two planks at the base of the altar, she found a small gap. Inside, something gleamed faintly in the gloom. She reached in, pulling free a piece of parchment so brittle it almost fell apart in her hands. It was covered in ink, dark, red-brown, the characters blurred by moisture and time, but one phrase was clear. "Speak not its name, lest it answers." Her pulse quickened. Her first instinct was to laugh. It sounded like the kind of thing folklore collectors whispered to frighten new students. But this didn't feel like a story. This felt like a warning someone had written in panic. She turned the paper over. On the back, in smaller script, a line of English letters, faded, scratched by another hand decades later. Dr. K. Ishida, 1927. Her breath caught. That was the researcher whose field notes she had read, the one who'd written about the shrine that still whispers. The parchment trembled slightly in her hands, not from her touch, but as if something beneath it was breathing. She stumbled back, her shoulder knocking against the wooden beam. Dust rained down. When she looked again, the parchment had gone still. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her notebook. A gust of air pushed through the open gate, carrying with it the faint sound of movement, not footsteps, something heavier, dragging through the soil. She turned toward the trees, but saw only the shifting mist. The world returned to its hush. She stayed there a long time, staring at the altar that no longer seemed empty. And then she saw it. On the altar's edge, where her brush had swept away the soot, something had appeared, barely visible. A symbol carved so faintly it caught only the slant of light. A circle with a line descending through it, tapering into three smaller lines like roots. She recognized it instantly. The symbol for kami, a god or spirit, but it had been inverted. The god was not above, it was below. That night, Mina sat by candlelight in her room, her notes spread across the small wooden table. Every attempt to sketch the shrine came out wrong, angles bent, shadows drawn in places where there had been no other. She caught herself humming without realizing, a low, strange rhythm she didn't remember hearing before. A fragment of the prayer returned to her mind, soft as the mist curling through her window. To the God who listens in silence, we give voice to keep it from speaking. Her candle flickered. The flame leaned toward the door. And then, just for a heartbeat, she heard it again. That voice from the forest. A whisper, not in words, but in hunger. It sounded like breath drawn through wood. It sounded like her own voice echoing back from the trees.
The forest never truly slept. Even in silence, it breathed. By the third morning, Mina had begun to sense the rhythm of the village, if it could be called that. Dawn arrived with no birdsong, only the creak of old wood shifting in the chill. Smoke rose from 2 houses, but no one stepped outside. The few faces she saw looked away, as though afraid her gaze might bring something with it. She felt like a trespasser among ghosts. Her notes were spread across the desk, the parchment from the shrine resting on top. The ink shimmered faintly in the dim light, a deep red hue that darkened when touched. She ran a cautious finger along the edge of the script, tracing each curling syllable of the forbidden prayer. Speak not its name, lest it answers. The phrase pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat. She wondered if Ishida, whoever he was, had read it aloud before writing those words. She wondered if that was why no trace of him had ever been found. By midday, she could no longer resist. The shrine had taken root in her thoughts. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the soot-stained altar. She heard the sound of that whisper, low, distant, unfinished. It was not just curiosity now, it was compulsion. And somewhere, behind that compulsion, she felt something waiting. The forest path seemed shorter this time, as if the trees had drawn closer together overnight. The air was thick with the smell of wet bark and earth. When she reached the shrine, sunlight barely touched the clearing. The ash leaves carpeted the ground in a perfect circle, just as before. She knelt before the altar and laid the parchment beside it. The silence was complete, so complete that she could hear the faint crack of her own joints as she folded her hands. Her voice trembled. To the God who listens in silence, she whispered, repeating what she remembered from the old inscription. We give voice to keep it from speaking. The words left her mouth like smoke, thin, dissolving. But something caught them. The air changed. Not wind, not movement. A response. Her breath faltered. She spoke again, slower this time, letting each syllable echo between her lips and the hollow inside the shrine. To the God who listens. The last word came back. Not as an echo, there was no delay. It returned instantly, spoken in her own voice, but deeper, wrong, like hearing herself through water. Listens. Her pulse raced. She froze, her eyes wide, her ears straining. The sound came again, closer this time, overlapping her breath. She stood too fast, her knees scraping wood. The forest had gone deathly still. She waited. And then, softly, the altar exhaled.
Ash rose from the cracks between the planks, swirling like smoke. The whispering filled the clearing again, but now it had rhythm. Words turned inside out. A prayer, yes, but not hers. It sounded as though 100 mouths were reciting beneath the ground. Mina stumbled backward, clutching her notebook to her chest. Her voice caught in her throat, but she forced herself to write, the pen moving faster than thought. When spoken aloud, the words return, not echo, reflection. The shrine hears. She looked up again. The air shimmered faintly above the altar. The pattern she had uncovered on the wood was glowing now, softly, as if lit from underneath. A single drop of something dark slid from the upper beam and landed on the stone bowl below. Not rain, not sap. It was warm. Blood. She stepped forward, reaching out in disbelief. The wood was dry, no wound, no crack, but the drop had stained the rim of the offering bowl. The blood pulsed once, faintly, before seeping into the stone. Her heart pounded. She turned, ready to leave, and stopped. Someone was standing at the edge of the trees. A figure, half veiled in mist, small, still. It looked like a child. Mina froze. "Hello?" she called softly. No response. The child stepped forward, bare feet leaving no print in the soil. Its head tilted, its skin pale and thin like paper. She could see the outline of its ribs beneath the fabric, if it was fabric at all. It opened its mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, Mina heard it in her mind. "You spoke the words backward." Her stomach dropped. "What?" The child blinked slowly. Its eyes were colorless. It pointed toward the altar, where the parchment she'd laid had begun to smoke. She lunged forward, grabbing it, but it crumbled instantly in her hands, turning to ash that clung to her skin like soot. Beneath the altar, something shifted. A deep, slow vibration rolled through the earth. The child stepped back into the trees. "It's listening now." And then it was gone. The clearing remained. The silence returned, but something had changed in its texture. Too thick, too alive. She felt it pressing against her eardrums, filling her lungs, wrapping around her heartbeat like a whisper she couldn't unhear. When she finally stumbled back to the village, dusk had already fallen. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke, though no fires burned. As she reached the inn, the old man was waiting outside. "You went there again," he said quietly. Mina's throat was dry. "You knew what it was." He looked past her toward the forest. "I knew what it used to be." "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. His gaze lingered on her hands. "Wash that off before it follows you inside." She looked down. The soot from the parchment had sunk into her skin, the lines forming faint spirals along her palms, spirals that matched the symbol carved on the altar. That night, when she tried to sleep, the whispers returned, but this time they didn't come from the forest. They came from inside her room, from the walls, from the mirror, from somewhere beneath the floorboards. And when she whispered back, "Who's there?" the voice that answered sounded exactly like her own. By morning, Mina had stopped trusting silence. The whispering from the walls had faded with the light, but a different kind of unease remained. It clung to her skin the way smoke clings to clothes, unseen but undeniable. She checked the mirror. Her reflection looked unchanged, but something behind her eyes felt quieter. She turned her hands over. The soot-stained spiral on her palm had faded to faint impressions, like bruises made of memory. She scrubbed them raw in the basin by the window, but the skin underneath still felt marked. When she stepped outside, the village looked no different. Its quiet homes, its narrow paths, its sagging roofs and weather-worn wood. But now, with new eyes, she noticed something she'd overlooked before. There were no children. Not a single laugh, no footsteps skipping through dirt, no toys left abandoned in grass. The village was full of silence, but not the kind that comes from peace. This was absence. She found the old man sitting by the inn's well, sharpening the same blade he'd carved bark with days before. "Can I ask you something?" Mina said. His eyes flicked up. "You already have." She ignored the retort. "There are no children in this village, none. Why?" He stopped sharpening. The wind moved past them slowly, like someone holding their breath. He said nothing for so long she thought he might never answer. Then finally, softly, he spoke. "There were." She sat on the stone ledge beside him, careful not to push. "Did they leave?" "No." His voice cracked like old timber. "They were taken." Her breath caught. "By what?" He didn't look at her. "By what we forgot to worship." The silence grew heavier. Years ago, he told her, the village was filled with laughter. Children ran barefoot through the rice fields, climbed trees that bent low with fruit, and every spring they held the festival of Ash, a quiet offering of prayers and silence where no one spoke for a full day. They believed that the forest god, the one who listened in stillness, would be appeased if they gave it their silence as a gift. They had forgotten its name generations ago, but the shrine still stood, and the ritual remained, until one year it didn't. "It was the drought," he said, eyes glassy with memory. "Crops failed, animals died, people grew bitter. They thought the silence wasn't working anymore. So they broke the tradition. They sang, they laughed, and someone, he never said who, burned offerings meant for the god. That summer, the children began to vanish. Not at once, slowly, quietly, like ash dissolving in water, one by one," he said. "They searched, screamed, prayed, but it didn't help. It wasn't a punishment," he whispered. "It was a reminder. We forgot what silence was for." Mina's chest felt tight. "Where did they go?" He looked at her then, really looked, and his voice was just breath. "They didn't go anywhere. They were taken back." He reached into his pocket and handed her something, a small charm made of twine and teeth, child-sized teeth, polished and threaded with care. "We bury one every spring, even now," he said. Mina couldn't speak. As she rose to leave, his hand caught her wrist. His fingers were thin, cold. "You heard it, didn't you? The whisper?" She nodded slowly. "Then it's marked you. It always starts with a voice and ends with forgetting who you are." She pulled away gently and walked back to her room. That night, unable to sleep, Mina wandered the village alone. The moon was weak, smothered by cloud. Her feet took her without direction, through narrow alleys, past shuttered windows, over the footbridge that crossed the shallow stream. And there,
In a garden behind one of the houses, she saw it. A line of small shoes. Dozens of them. Pairs of sandals, cloth slippers, rain boots with faded patterns, all placed neatly along the fence, facing the woods. Beside each one, a bowl of rice. And every bowl was empty. Not scattered, not spoiled, as if something had eaten every grain. Her hands trembled. She turned to leave, but froze. A single giggle, high-pitched, too soft for the wind to carry. She spun around, no one there, only shadows, only trees. But the air had changed. And then came the sound of feet, bare feet, running, not toward her, but around her. She turned again, heart racing. Nothing, stillness. But the giggling returned, followed by the faintest voice, "We're still here." The rice bowls, the shoes, the festival. They hadn't buried memories, they had been feeding them. Mina backed away slowly. The air buzzed with something ancient, something starved. She didn't run. She knew that whatever still walked the village did not chase. It waited, listened, watched. She returned to the inn, locked her door, and turned the mirror to face the wall. And in the silence before sleep, she heard the smallest voice whisper through the floorboards. "Will you remember us when it takes your name too?" The next morning, Mina woke to the sound of chanting that wasn't there. It lingered between waking and dream, a rhythmic hum that dissolved the instant she tried to listen. She sat upright, heart pounding, the echo fading into the quiet walls. The sun was pale outside her window, filtered through the skeletal arms of the forest. For a moment, she thought the whispers from the night before had followed her into the day. Her notebook lay open beside her pillow. The last page she remembered writing was blank. Now it wasn't. In thick, dark ink, new lines had appeared, curved and looping, written in a language she didn't know. But she recognized the shape of the words. They matched the symbols carved into the shrine. She pressed her fingers to the page. Still wet. Her breath caught. The ink wasn't ink. It was blood. She stumbled downstairs, the notebook clutched to her chest. The old man at the well was gone. The inn's front room was empty except for a single bowl on the counter, filled with uncooked rice. A fly drifted lazily above it, wings trembling in the stale air. Mina hesitated. She didn't know why she did it, perhaps to calm the weight in her chest. But she carried the bowl outside, down the dirt road, toward the forest. The villagers watched from their windows. Not a word was spoken. Only eyes, dozens of them, following her every step. By the time she reached the clearing, her hands were shaking. The shrine waited in its familiar silence. The ash leaves around it had turned darker overnight, like the color of smoke trapped in water. She knelt before the altar, placed the bowl on the stone slab, and whispered softly, "For the God who listens in silence, for peace, for memory." The words fell heavy in her throat, but she wasn't sure she'd said them right. She couldn't remember the name from the prayer. She couldn't even remember how the syllables had sounded. So, reaching for something, anything familiar, she replaced the name with one she knew, a different spirit, a minor deity of the harvest, once worshipped in her hometown. It felt harmless, respectful even. She bowed deeply, and the forest exhaled. At first, it was only a breath, soft, slow.
Then the leaves began to rise, swirling upward in a pattern that defied the still air. The rice in the bowl shifted, as though stirred by invisible fingers. Mina lifted her head. The trees were whispering again, but this time, the sound wasn't rhythmic, it was mocking. Words returned to her ears, layered in echoes, her own voice warped and folded backward. You said another's name, but I will remember yours. Her heart froze. She stood abruptly, nearly toppling the bowl. The rice scattered across the altar, and something moved beneath it. Something small, white, and thin. A bone. A child's finger bone. The wind screamed through the clearing. The bowl shattered. And then, silence. Mina's pulse roared in her ears. She turned and ran, stumbling through the trees, branches clawing at her clothes. The mist clung to her face, thick as breath. And somewhere behind her, she swore she heard laughter, soft, endless, echoing through every leaf. By the time she reached the village, dusk had fallen. The streets were empty, doors barred, windows sealed. She pounded on the end door, shouting for the old man. No answer. When she finally pushed it open, she found him kneeling by the hearth, head bowed, hands trembling. On the floor in front of him lay another bowl of rice and something wet glistening atop it. Blood. He didn't look up. You said the wrong name, didn't you? He whispered. I didn't mean to. You think intention matters? His voice cracked, trembling between anger and fear. You called it by another's name. You insulted it. He turned toward her then, eyes sunken and hollow. When you offer to something forgotten, you must never replace it. He rose unsteadily, gripping her arm. Listen to me before it's too late. His hand shook violently as he pressed a charm into her palm. It was made of straw, bound in a loop, with a single black thread hanging from its center. Tie this above your door. Don't let the ash in. If you see them move, don't breathe. Mina's mouth was dry. Why? He met her eyes. Because what listens in silence has heard your voice now. That night, the forest did not sleep. From her window she saw the ash leaves rise again, swirling down the road in long ribbons toward the inn. They moved with eerie precision, like a procession. Each leaf drifted against her window pane and stuck there, one by one, until the glass was no longer clear, but gray, clouded by ash and breath. She tied the straw charm above her door, fingers trembling. Her candle flickered once, and then went out. In the dark, the whispers returned. Faint, hungry, familiar. You said another's name, but I will remember yours. The air thickened with the smell of soot. Her lungs ached, and beneath the window, something scraped against the wood, slow, deliberate, a sound like fingernails tracing a prayer. When she looked again, her own reflection was there in the glass, pale, wide-eyed, lips parted in horror. But it wasn't her face that moved. It was the one behind her, a hollow-eyed figure, smiling through the ash.
The charm above her door was gone by morning. Only the thread remained, snapped clean through, dangling like a cut vein. The straw ring had vanished without a trace, and beneath it, on the wooden floor of her room, someone had drawn a circle in soot. Inside the circle, her name, written over and over again, each letter misshapen, warped, as if the hand that wrote them had forgotten what writing meant. Mina didn't scream. She sat on the floor for a long time, staring at the black marks, too cold to tremble. The whispers hadn't stopped during the night. They'd only grown fainter, closer, more intimate. She heard them in the gaps between floorboards, in the throb behind her eyes, in the breath she held without realizing. The shrine was no longer waiting. It had begun to speak. By midday, Mina returned to the clearing, driven by something she couldn't explain. Not curiosity, not fear, obligation. The forest had shifted. Trees leaned closer together. Branches arched like ribs. The wind no longer moved straight through. It twisted, spiraled, carried voices that never quite became words. When she stepped into the shrine's clearing, she gasped aloud. The cracks in the wood had widened. The beams that once supported the roof now bent inward, groaning like bones too old to bear the weight. Between the planks of the altar, long, jagged fissures spread like veins, and from within them, something whispered. It wasn't sound in the way sound should be. It was texture. Dry, fragmented syllables leaking through the gaps like breath through a broken mouth. Mina stepped closer. The whispering stopped. She reached into her coat, pulled out her field recorder, and hit record. She knelt beside the altar and held the mic toward the cracks. At first, there was nothing. Then, clicks, like insects. Then, breath. Then, words. Not spoken, written across her spine. Her pen moved before she realized it. Her notebook sat open beside her. She didn't look at the page. She just wrote. The ink looped in spirals, symbols she had never studied, drawn by a hand no longer entirely hers. When she finally looked down, her breath caught. She'd written an entire page of prayers. Backwards. The forest darkened. The wind ceased. And then she heard it. A new crack split the altar with a groan, long, deep, wet. From within it, black sap oozed, thick and slow, carrying flecks of ash and bone. It filled the offering bowl in silence. Her recorder hissed and died. Mina stepped back, eyes wide, heart hammering. The sap in the bowl shifted. Bubbles rose, shapes, faces, mouths that never closed. And then a whisper, clear, female, and deeply familiar. You spoke my name, but not yours. Mina staggered backward. Her notebook fell. The page turned on its own, flipping to a blank sheet. And then, as if guided by invisible hands, ink began to rise from the paper, spelling one word again and again. Mina, Mina, Mina. The shrine knew her now. Not just her voice, her name. She returned to the village at twilight, her skin cold, her boots soaked with something too thick to be water. The windows were all dark, the streets empty, but the walls whispered. Faint prayers, shattered promises. As she passed, she heard snatches of them. We fed it silence. We burned the wrong offerings. It never wanted worship. It wanted voice. At the inn, the old man was gone. In his place sat a woman Mina hadn't seen before, her back turned, hair gray, braided with ash leaves. She sat by the hearth, unmoving, as if carved from wax. Mina stepped in slowly. Hello? The woman spoke without turning. You're marked now, she said. Her voice was brittle, like a leaf crushed beneath weight. You heard it speak. Mina nodded, unsure whether to run or kneel. You've fed it, the woman continued. You've opened its cracks. Now it will feed through you. What is it? Mina whispered. The woman turned then, and Mina took a step back. Her eyes were entirely black, not sockets, just shadow. and her lips were stitched shut with red thread, each knot pulled tight. When she tried to speak again, the thread snapped, and she screamed, a scream not of pain, but of language. The sound poured from her throat like boiling ink. Symbols filled the room, etched into the air, scarring the walls. The scream echoed with names Mina didn't recognize, voices she didn't own. And then the woman collapsed, dead, silent, eyes open. On her chest, scrawled in soot, voice returned. That night, Mina did not sleep. She sat in her room, candle lit, notebook open. And then, slowly, cracks began to form in the walls, thin at first, then widening, then whispering. Not just voices now, but questions. Who are you? What did you forget? What name did you leave behind? The mirror in her dresser splintered down the center. In the reflection, she saw the shrine. She saw herself kneeling inside it and whispering something no one was supposed to hear. And in her own voice, cracked and distant, she whispered, "I think I'm forgetting how to speak."
Morning came gray and uncertain, like light remembered rather than born. The mist hung low over the village, thick as unspoken thought. Mina hadn't slept. The walls of her room were webbed with cracks that seemed to pulse when she looked too long. Each fissure whispered faint syllables, as if the house itself was learning to speak again. She dressed without thinking, her hands trembling as she buttoned her coat. Her voice, she realized, hadn't left her throat since last night. When she tried to hum, nothing came, only air. It was as if the sound had been taken from her, or worse, traded. The forest greeted her like a cathedral of drowned wood. Every trunk bore marks now, long dark slashes carved deep into the bark, symbols repeating the same circular pattern she'd seen on the shrine. Birds avoided them, even insects were silent. She carried her notebook close, pressed against her chest like a prayer. Inside, the pages had begun to change. The ink she'd written in black now shimmered gold, moving, alive, as though the words resented being read. Each sentence seemed to breathe, each line hummed. She reached the shrine near noon. It no longer looked abandoned. The altar stood upright again, its beams realigned, its roof patched by something that glistened faintly beneath the moss, wet, sinewy, as if grown rather than built. The air hummed softly, resonating in her bones. Something about it felt awake. She stepped forward, notebook open, pen trembling. She needed to know its name, the god sealed here, the one the villagers feared to speak. But how does one find a name the world has forgotten? At the edge of the clearing, she heard footsteps. Slow, measured, familiar. The old man from the inn appeared, carrying a wrapped bundle in his arms. His face was gray, drawn tight as bark, eyes unfocused. "You shouldn't have come again," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He set the bundle down on the shrine steps and unwrapped it. Inside was a tattered scroll, the paper yellowed and cracked. "The elders kept this. No one reads it anymore, but I think it wants you to." She hesitated. "What is it?" "The god's tongue," he whispered. "The first words ever spoken to it, the last words before silence." He stepped back, almost afraid of his own offering. Mina unrolled the scroll. The The script was unlike anything she had seen. Curved lines woven like strands of hair, looping into endless circles. It wasn't written to be read left to right, but spiraling inward toward a symbol at the center. She felt it the moment she touched the ink, a vibration that slid up her fingers and into her throat. The sound came before the thought, a whisper that wasn't hers. Remember the name that memory forgot. Her lips moved, words poured out of her, ancient and broken. The sound filled the clearing, heavy and alive, too large for a human mouth. The shrine answered. The cracks along the altar flared with dim light. The earth shuddered. The god had heard its language again. When Mina came to, she was on her knees, her head pressed to the ground. The scroll lay open beside her, its ink now pulsing faintly, wet with blood, not from the parchment, but from her nose, her ears, her mouth. Her throat burned as if she had swallowed fire. The old man was gone, and something else was there. A presence, soft, low, humming in a language she could almost understand. It wasn't speaking words, it was remembering them through her. She clutched her notebook, opened it blindly, and began to write. But the letters came out wrong. They curved backward, fused into spirals, then broke apart into the same pattern as the scroll. Her notebook trembled in her hands. The pages fluttered until one tore free, landing in the dirt. On it, written in a child's scroll, were 6 characters she'd never written before, yet she somehow knew what they meant. The god's true name. Her vision blurred. She heard her voice again, but not from her lips, from the trees, from the ground, from the air that pressed against her chest. It whispered her name back to her. Not Mina, something older, a name she didn't remember ever having. That night, she returned to the inn, blood still on her sleeve, and collapsed by the window. She could not speak. Every time she tried, the sound warped into that foreign rhythm, the language of the shrine. She recorded herself, hoping to analyze it later. But when she played the tape back, she didn't hear her voice. She heard dozens. Men, women, children, all speaking through her mouth, all in the same forgotten tongue. And, layered beneath them, deep and slow, was a single voice, vast, mournful, patient. It spoke one word, her name, but not as a question, as a claim. In the distance, the shrine cracked again. The forest shuddered, exhaling a sound like breath escaping from stone. Mina pressed her hands over her ears, tears spilling silently down her face. The sound was not loud. It was remembered. And beneath it, she heard the whispering voice from her dreams, echoing softly, tenderly, like a mother teaching her child to speak for the first time. You are not learning my language, child. You are remembering it.
The next morning, the village felt older. Not quiet, ancient, as though the roofs and walls had aged 100 years overnight. The paint peeled deeper, the signs leaned heavier, and the sky above seemed weighed down by something no one could name. Mina walked the empty street with a name in her throat and none in her mouth. The god's true name, learned from the scroll etched in spirals behind her eyes, beat like a second pulse beneath her skin. But she hadn't spoken it aloud, not yet. Something inside her warned not to, not until she understood what it wanted. She returned to the old man's well, hoping he would be there again. He wasn't. But someone else waited, a woman with ash in her hair and silence in her eyes.
She sat cross-legged by the well's edge, a lacquered box in her lap. Without looking up, she said, "You opened the scroll." Mina froze. "You saw?" "I heard." The woman's voice was brittle, the kind of voice that remembered grief too clearly. It was never meant to be read. It was meant to sleep. Mina sat beside her slowly. What was the festival? The woman's hands tightened around the box. For a long time she didn't speak. Then, with a careful breath, she opened it. Inside, a child's mask. Made of carved wood, painted white with blackened lips, hollow eyes, a slit down the center so the mask could be cracked in half when the ritual was done. "The festival of ash," she whispered, "held once a year at the last frost before planting season." Mina leaned in. "We wore these," the woman continued. "We walked to the shrine in silence, not a single word, not a sound. We brought offerings, not gold or food, but memories, names we no longer wanted, words we wished to forget. We gave them to the god, not out of worship, but out of necessity." She paused, her fingers brushing the wood. "If the god had no voices to carry, it would sleep. If we fed it silence, it would stay silent." Mina's heart pounded, but something changed. The woman nodded slowly. "The elders grew proud, said the festival was superstition, said the silence kept us small. One year they refused to hold it, burned the masks, burned the shrine scroll, called it a cleansing." Her gaze turned to Mina, cold and hollow. "That was the year the children disappeared, the year the god began to remember." Back at the inn, Mina spread her notes across the floor. Each page now moved faintly when her hand passed over it, the ink rising like breath on glass. She pieced together what she knew. The god was never meant to be praised, only appeased. Its shrine was not a place of devotion. It was a mouth sealed with silence. The villagers had once offered names, words, selves to keep the god quiet. But now it had begun to listen again, to speak again. And through her, it was learning to be remembered. That night the village lit no lanterns, no doors opened, no voices stirred. But from the woods she saw it, a procession, figures emerging one by one from the trees, masked, barefoot, holding ash bowls. Not villagers, not people, not anymore. Their limbs too long, their shadows bent at wrong angles. Each figure walked silently to the shrine and placed their bowl at the altar, then turned and vanished into the earth. She watched from the edge of the path, breath caught in her throat. And as the last figure bowed, it lifted its mask, revealing a face she recognized. Hers. Mina fled back to the village, the name of the god pounding against her teeth like a word that needed to be spoken, but she dared not. She clutched her notebook, opened the last page, and found it blank. No ink, no marks, just one phrase carved into the paper as if with fingernails. "The festival is not over. You are the silence now." By morning, the village square was different. At its center stood a new altar, one made of stone, old and cracked, but untouched by time. No one acknowledged it, no one even looked at it, but Mina felt it, a pull in her chest, a weight in her bones. The god had moved, or perhaps it had always been here, beneath the village, beneath the well, beneath the words no one dared to say. She approached the altar. No flowers, no incense, only names, dozens of them, carved into the base. She recognized one, her mother's, then her grandfather's, then her own, written backwards. A-N-I-M. her legs gave way. She knelt before the altar, and somewhere behind her, the whispering began again. A voice from stone, a tongue from beneath the earth. It said nothing at first, then one word, spoken in her voice: continue.
Mina dreamed of the altar that night. Not the one in the clearing, not even the new one in the village square. It was deeper, older, carved directly into the earth, buried beneath stone and ash, surrounded by teeth instead of candles. Children stood in a circle, their mouths sewn shut. Their eyes stared not at her, but through her, as if they were remembering a version of her she had forgotten. They chanted, not with lips, but with presence, a rhythmless hum, a call without breath. And at the center, a single figure knelt, small, thin, with his back to her. When he turned, Mina woke, screaming. His face had no mouth, only a gaping hollow where a voice had once lived. She rose before dawn. Her skin felt like paper left too long in the rain. The village remained silent, the windows still shuttered, but the trees leaned closer. She could feel them listening. Her notebook had written in the night again, pages filled with looping marks and reversed syllables. But one drawing stood out among the symbols. A child, barefoot, hollow-faced, one hand raised, pointing toward the forest. Beneath it, a single line, written in her own handwriting. He's waiting. Mina followed the path before she could talk herself out of it. The air was thick, wet with the scent of rotting wood and burnt offerings. Ash leaves curled along the trail like fingers reaching upward. She stepped carefully. After half an hour, the shrine came into view. But this time, she didn't stop. The child was there, standing just beyond the altar, where the trees thickened and the ground dipped into shadow. He looked no more than 8 years old, ribs visible beneath thin skin, his eyes wide and gray like fog. His mouth was stitched shut, not crudely, but reverently, like a ritual meant to protect, not punish. He watched her, then turned and walked deeper into the forest. Mina followed without a word. They descended together, past roots that pulsed faintly, like veins beneath the earth, past stone pillars half buried in moss, etched with symbols too old for language. The air grew cold, then still, and then hollow. She realized they were walking beneath the mountain now, into the belly of something not meant to be opened. The child stopped before a wall of carved stone, a doorway without a door. Beyond it, darkness that bent the light. He stepped aside, inviting her in. Mina lit her lantern, heart pounding. Inside, the air grew thick with memory. She felt it in her chest, inhaled voices not her own. The walls were covered in handprints, thousands of them pressed into the stone, in soot, in blood, in something older. In the center of the room stood a low altar. Surrounding it were dolls, hundreds of them, each hand-carved from ash wood, each marked with a name on its chest. She knelt to examine one. It wore her name, the real name she hadn't told anyone in years. The child stepped beside her and knelt. He placed a doll in her hands. Its face was blank. Its chest was empty. He pointed to her, then to the altar, then to the space beneath it, a crawl space filled with roots, bones, and movement. Something breathed below. She tried to speak, to ask what it meant, but the child reached out with trembling fingers and gently touched her throat. Her voice vanished. Not stolen, given.
And in that silence, she understood. These were not dolls. They were offerings. Each one carved in the image of a child who once spoke when they should have stayed silent. Each one sacrificed in voice, not in flesh. Each one preserved because their memory fed the god. And now, it was her turn. Mina carved her name into the doll's chest. Her hands moved without permission, but without resistance. The altar cracked open, and below it, something stirred. She felt it rise, not physically, but through the language that had begun to bloom again in her bones. The child placed the doll on the altar, then turned to her and smiled. A crack formed along the stitches of his mouth. They split, and his first word was her name. Mina, spoken not in accusation, but in recognition. He had remembered, and now, so would the shrine. She returned to the village at dusk. No one opened their doors, but she knew they had seen her. For the first time, they feared what she had become. The god had chosen her not as a victim, but as a vessel. That night, she slept without dreams. Only one voice remained in her head. Soft, male, childlike. We're not lost. We were buried, but you're digging us out.
The forest no longer whispered. It breathed. Every tree exhaled as Mina passed, their leaves trembling not from wind, but recognition. The roots seemed to shift beneath her steps, like veins adjusting to carry new blood. She was not a guest here anymore. She was part of the shrine. The child had not returned since yesterday, but he had left something behind. A map, drawn not in ink, but in scratches, gouged into her notebook's last page. 3 symbols, a Tory gate, a spiral, and a mouth. She knew what they meant. The gate was the one she passed every time she entered the forest. The spiral was the path that never appeared on any map, but always revealed itself when she stopped looking. And the mouth was what waited below. She packed nothing, only her notebook, and a lantern that no longer needed fire to glow. The entrance was where it had always been, only now she noticed it. Beyond the shrine's altar, beneath the cracked foundation, where roots tangled like knotted prayers, there was a hollow, a narrow gap in the earth, lined with stones carved by hands that had never known light. Mina crawled in. The air thickened instantly. No wind, no echo, only the heavy pressure of old worship. It was wet inside, not with water, but with memory, clinging to her skin, seeping into her breath. She descended on her hands and knees, deeper than a building should allow, past layers of stone older than the village above, until she emerged into silence so complete it became sound. The chamber was vast, circular, breathing, not carved, but grown. Pillars made of fused bones rose into darkness. Veins of soot ran along the walls, pulsing faintly. In the center, sunken into the earth, was a shrine that mirrored the one above, but it was different, older, hungrier. The shrine beneath the shrine had no altar, no offerings, only a mouth. A perfect circle carved into stone, rimmed with blackened symbols. At its center, a round slab sealed the opening. It pulsed faintly beneath her feet,
as if something inside was dreaming of breath. Around the edges of the room, voices stirred. Mina did not turn. She knew they weren't living. They were memories, and they remembered her. She approached the stone mouth, knelt beside it. She didn't speak. She offered silence. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, from beneath the sealed mouth, a whisper rose like steam. "You carry a name, not your own." She swallowed. Her throat burned. Her thoughts spiraled. And then, in her own voice, but deeper, she whispered, "Then tell me the one that is." The slab shuddered. Dust fell like snow. The symbols along the rim flared with soft, pulsing light, and slowly the stone mouth opened, not with sound, but with remembrance. From the dark within, a shape emerged. Not a god, not a demon, a face, human, featureless, formed from ash and breath. It stared at her with eyes that weren't there, then opened its mouth and gave her back her voice. Mina gasped. The air flooded her chest. But when she tried to speak, her words came out backwards, every syllable a reflection, every breath an echo of something older. The god had not given her power. It had returned what she once gave up. Visions filled the chamber, flickering along the walls. Children bowing at altars, mothers sewing mouths shut in tears, fathers burning names into bark, villagers digging holes not for graves, but for memories they were too afraid to carry. Shame, guilt, forgotten names, buried gods, and now all of it was awake. Mina stepped away from the mouth. It did not close. It breathed. It whispered, "You are not its priest. You are its memory." When she emerged from beneath the shrine, dusk had swallowed the world. The trees no longer watched. They followed, each one turning softly in her direction as she passed. The sky bled colorless. The wind carried voices, and somewhere behind her, the altar cracked again, deeper this time, like ribs breaking before a scream. She returned to the village, but it was no longer a village. The buildings stood. The well still held water. The doors were still closed, but the air was wrong. It was filled with language, not spoken, not written, but felt. And she understood every word. They said, "The shrine remembers, and so must you."
Mina no longer dreamed. She remembered instead. Memories that weren't hers, unfolding behind her eyes like old film reels. A girl kneeling at an altar, slicing her palm open to draw a name in blood. A boy whispering prayers with his lips sewn shut, each thread tied to his mother's fingers. A family standing in silence as their child was lowered into the earth, not for burial, but for safekeeping. These were not visions. They were inheritance. The shrine had opened, and now its memories flowed through her like ink through paper. When she awoke, her notebook had changed again. The pages no longer turned. They spun, spiraling outward from the center as if pulled by some unseen gravity. And the ink? The ink had begun to bleed. Not leak, not drip. Bleed from the center outward,
forming perfect black circles that pulsed when she touched them. Each circle whispered a single word. Each word hummed with a voice she recognized, hers, but older, forgotten. Mina traced one of the spirals with her finger. The page shivered beneath her skin. The circle deepened, turning from ink to depth, as if she could fall into the page. She stared into it, and it stared back. The mirror in her room had fogged over in the night, but not from steam. Symbols now lined its edges, drawn from the same bleeding ink. As she looked at her reflection, she didn't see herself. She saw the altar, breathing, and standing behind it, a woman wearing her face, not her clothes, not her hair, but her bones. The woman raised her hand. So did Mina. Their movements were identical, but their eyes, her eyes, were gone. Downstairs, the inn was silent. The old man had vanished. So had the woman with ash in her hair. The hearth burned with no wood, its flames rising from soot. On the table sat a single sheet of paper, unfolded, blank. Mina picked it up, turned it over. One word: remember. She stepped into the village square at dusk and found every door marked with spirals, painted in ash, drawn in circles, some large, some small, some still wet. Each house had been named again, and all those names were hers. Mina, 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 Mina. She turned a corner. The children's shoes were back, lined up against the fence. Only now, each pair had feet in them. No legs, no bodies, just feet, standing, waiting. She didn't scream. She walked past them, and they turned, slowly, without movement, and faced her. The air buzzed. The shoes whispered in unison. You wrote our names. Now we'll write yours. That night, she couldn't close the notebook. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Pages turned on their own. Symbols spread beyond the margins, leaking onto the desk, the walls, her arms. Her veins itched. Her breath sang. And when she looked at her hands, she saw ink, looping, spiraling, bleeding in silent circles. She picked up her pen, and without thinking, began to write in reverse. Each word wrote itself before her eyes. Each line hummed like prayer. She wrote for hours, and when she finally stopped, the last page read, "You are not the writer. You are the page." Her voice returned that night, but not all of it. Only the old words. Words no longer spoken by people. Words remembered by soil, by soot, by silence. She said them aloud, and the wind bowed. She said them again, and the forest turned. She said them once more, and her room cracked open at the seams. The walls bled circles. The ceiling pulsed with names. The floor whispered, "You are ink. You are memory. You are the shrine's voice now." At dawn, she found the village gathered, not in fear, in reverence. Each villager stood outside, their mouths closed, their eyes open. Each held a page torn from their own walls, marked with spirals, names, and her handwriting. They did not speak. They bowed. And Mina understood. She was no longer an outsider. She was the festival,
the offering, the god's new language. The shrine no longer needed walls or wood. It had her, and her voice was writing again.
By now, Mina had stopped wondering where her old self had gone. She understood. She hadn't lost it. She had given it. Piece by piece, word by word, page by page. And in its place, something ancient had begun to bloom. The villagers no longer spoke, but their silence wasn't empty. It was devotion. Each morning they placed pages beneath their doors, pages written in Mina's hand, though she never remembered writing them. Each night, those pages burned, without fire, without smoke, only disappearance. And in the ashes, names returned. Not names they used, names they had buried. It happened first to the woman with ash in her hair. Mina passed her on the road. The woman looked up and said a name that made Mina's knees buckle. "Yukiko," she whispered. Her voice cracked with memory. Her eyes filled with light. "I haven't said that name in 60 years. Mina didn't answer. She didn't have to. The shrine had remembered for her. That afternoon, the whispering grew louder, not from the trees, from the sky. It wept ash instead of rain, falling slow, soft, without weight. And wherever it landed, old words appeared. On rooftops, on rivers, on skin. Names, prayers, regrets. All the things the villagers had hidden in silence. Mina stood in the center of the square and opened her arms, and the god spoke. Its voice wasn't thunder, it was ache. A sound like breath remembered too late, a voice that had waited centuries not to be praised, but to be spoken of. "You forgot me, but I did not forget you." The words echoed in every wall, in every well, in every wound the village had buried. "You silenced me, and in return I took your children, not out of hate, but to remind you I was still here." Mina knelt, not in fear, in understanding. She saw it then, clear as day. This was never a vengeful god, never a wrathful one. It was a god of memory, a spirit born not of worship, but of remembrance. It had once protected the village, carried its grief, held its forgotten names like treasures. But when they cast it aside, when they burned the festival, when they dared to live as if their history was dead, the gods simply did what memory does when ignored. It haunted. Mina stood again and spoke the name she had held on her tongue for days. The name written in spirals, the name whispered by trees, the name she hadn't spoken because she knew, once said, nothing would be the same. Ayakashi no Koi, the voice of forgotten things. The shrine trembled, the village exhaled, and the air filled with light. Not brightness, but awareness. Every villager dropped to their knees, and from their lips poured songs they didn't know they remembered. Songs their grandmothers had hummed, lullabies once sung at funerals, prayers written on rice paper and left at cradles and graves. Mina joined them, not leading, just echoing. That night, she returned to the shrine, not the one above, not the one below, but the third one, the one that existed in her. She sat beneath the trees, opened her notebook, and for the first time asked a question. "What do you want?" And the answer came, not in sound, in feeling. To be remembered. That is all any God wants. Not offerings, not praise, just to not be forgotten. She wrote those words, let them bleed across the page, and the notebook closed on its own. When she looked up, the forest had knelt. Every tree, every root, every breath of wind, and in the distance, the gods sighed, not in hunger, in peace.
Mina woke without a voice. Not laryngitis, not silence. Absence. The kind of loss that doesn't sting, only lingers. Her mouth opened, but nothing moved. Even her breath felt quiet, like it too had forgotten her. The villagers didn't speak either, but their eyes told her they knew. This was the final offering, the last vow. The god had remembered them. Now it was time for them to return the favor. At noon, the sky turned colorless. Not gray, not white, just absent. The sun hovered like a memory that didn't belong. Shadows stretched long and thin, curling toward the shrine like fingers yearning to be held. Mina stood at the edge of the square. The villagers gathered around her, each holding a ribbon of cloth, faded, frayed, marked with their names. She recognized the shape. They were tongue bindings, used in old rituals to silence mourners, so their grief would not awaken the dead. One by one, they knelt before her and tied the cloths around her wrists. She didn't ask what it meant. She remembered. The shrine awaited her. But the forest did not part this time. It closed behind her, as if sealing her fate with every step. She followed the spiral path, each turn a prayer, each breath a memory. She passed the shoes again, only now each one was filled with light. Flickering, quiet souls, children not lost, just waiting. When she reached the clearing, the shrine had bloomed. That was the only word she had. Its roof had cracked open, petals of wood and moss unfolding upward. Roots now cradled it, holding it aloft like a mouth ready to sing. The altar glowed with a dim golden light, and above it, the god watched. Not as a figure, not as a voice, as a presence. A ripple in the world, a hush so sacred it bent the trees. Mina stepped forward. Her hands trembled. Her breath hitched. She knelt and waited. The wind stilled. The altar pulsed. And then, from the heart of the shrine, a single tongue emerged. Not flesh, not bone. A ribbon of memory curling in the air, seeking her lips. She did not resist. It entered her mouth gently, and with it, her voice returned, but no longer as hers. The villagers had gathered outside the clearing. They did not come closer. They knelt in a circle, heads bowed, hands covering their mouths. They knew what was happening. They had always known. The god had no shrine now, no statue, no altar, only a mouth. Hers.
Mina rose, the tongue of memory still coiled behind her teeth. She could feel it there, warm, pulsing, ancient. When she spoke, the words came not from her lungs, but from the soil. I remember. The forest bowed. The altar cracked, and from beneath it, smoke poured upward, not black, not choking, gray like ash caught in soft wind. It formed into faces, children, elders, forgotten ancestors. They drifted upward and vanished into the sky, not screaming, but singing. And for the first time since arriving, Mina smiled. She returned to the village that night, barefoot, cloaked in silence. But when she entered the inn, she found a mirror had been placed on the table. Its frame was carved with names, not hers, everyone else's. She looked inside and saw no reflection, only the shrine, only the forest, only the mouth that had waited for generations, and a voice, no longer separate from her own, whispering, "You are not just a vessel. You are the tongue that was swallowed, and now remembered."
The village awoke to stillness, not the fearful kind that waits for footsteps, but the sacred kind that follows them. There were no cries, no horns, no alarms, only a hush that felt like reverence, only the air holding its breath, because Mina was gone, but her voice remained. They say she walked into the shrine before dawn, barefoot, clothed in ash-colored linen, that the altar opened for her, not with splinters or cracks, but with a soft sigh, as if the shrine itself had been waiting. That she stepped inside the mouth of the god, carrying no name of her own, only those she had gathered. The villagers stood in silence, their ribbons tied once more around their wrists. They did not follow. They did not try to stop her. This was the final ritual, the last word, the full circle, the end of forgetting. In the chamber beneath the forest, the shrine's true form had bloomed wide. Stone and root had become something more, something pulsing, woven from memory and voice. There were no bones now, no dolls, no children waiting in the dark, only echoes, only names, only remembrance. Mina stood at the heart of it. The tongue of the god lay curled at her feet like a pet that had finally returned home. She knelt, palms open, and spoke the first prayer anyone had offered in generations. Not a plea, not a bargain, just a thank you. And the forest wept. Above, the trees shed their ash leaves in spirals, each leaf a whisper, each whisper a word once lost. They floated across the rooftops, across the wells, across the river that had once carried names into silence. And wherever they landed, the world remembered. In homes long shuttered, forgotten photographs reappeared. In attics sealed for decades, toys stirred without hands. In wells once dry, old lullabies echoed faintly from the stones. The shrine no longer needed to be fed, because now it was spoken. And that is all memory ever truly wants. In the square, where the villagers had once burned their festival, something new stood in its place. Not an altar, not a statue,
just a simple wooden post. At its base, carved into the grain, were 7 words. Speak my name, even if you whisper. No signature, no credit, only a place to kneel, only a reason to remember. And if you walk through that village today, the one not marked on maps, the one hidden behind silence, you may find a trail of ash leaves, perfectly still in windless air. You may follow them. You may reach the forest's edge. And if you do, you might hear her, Mina, the one who remembered, the voice of the shrine, the whisper that became prayer. And in the final light beneath the trees, where the earth still breathes, you may see her standing barefoot at the edge of the altar, eyes closed, mouth open, and the forest listening, not for silence, but for the sound of someone saying a name, just once, so it will never be forgotten again.